it's really all the departments here and everything you did here. And now I mentioned your credits, a few of them before here, they're all comedies. And here you've taken a little bit of a detour, oddly enough, with a movie called Joker that some people may come in and think, oh, it's going to be a good time entertaining here watching this.
It's true. I mean, you know, if you had watched the comedies that I've made over the years, they do tend to get darker as I had a little bit more power and a little more, you know, weight. And I've always been headed in that direction a little bit. To me, it's not as much of a jump as a lot of people kind of think. But, and you know, this movie's about a lot of things thematically. It's about, you know, childhood trauma. It's about lack of love. It's about the sort of loss of empathy in society. But it's also a little bit about comedy, at least from his perspective. It's about, you know, comedy versus tragedy and sort of his thing when he says, you know, you get to decide what's funny or not. You know, it's like, it's a little bit about just the state of comedy in some respects. So in a weird way, it does to me have something to do with comedy. And a lot of it also was informed, you know, the obvious references in the movie, you know, the 70s films, Sidney Lumet, of course, Martin Scorsese movies that we kind of looked to when we were making the movie. But really where it started from was silent films. It started with The Man Who Laughs, which is this film from like 1928, I think, that Scott Silver and I, who I wrote it with, we didn't even realize at the time. Then we did a little research, and The Man Who Laughs was actually the inspiration for when they created the Joker in comic books for Bob Kane and Bill Finger. That was their inspiration. We didn't actually know it at the time. We started looking at that. But another thing, just to tie it back to comedy, is this sort of Chaplin thing we have going on in the movie. And it was something, when I had spoken to Joaquin early about the character, when we were first meeting about it, I talked to him a little bit about that Arthur has music in him, that he's awkward and he's out of step, but he has this kind of, he has panache and he has this music in him. And I think that really connected with Joaquin in a way. And it was a little bit of looking at some Charlie Chaplin stuff. Obviously we put it in the movie, but I don't remember how we got there, but yeah, these little R-rated character studies of using the comic book world, but do these kind of small character study films and strip down, no CGI, get really interesting filmmakers to write and direct them. And I'd like to do the first one. I want to do Joker. It's going to be a character study in the vein of, I want a movie that feels like it came out in the summer of 1979. You know, and I started pitching them this idea, and they very quickly said, calm down, you're not starting a label here at Warner Brothers. But maybe you can go write this and tell us and show us what you mean. And so Scott Silver and I went off and wrote it in like 2016, 17. We handed it in. And then, you know, what happens in the movie business a lot is that people you pitch these ideas to, suddenly it's a different group of people now running the studio. You know, there's regime changes, and so we had to kind of start all over with the new regime. And they were resistant, not because of anything but what you just said. We're kind of taking, going to their crown jewel of IP and taking a character that existed in many movies before and kind of messing with it in a way. It was a tough movie to push through the system there. And, you know, it is a bold swing, and they ultimately, Toby Emmerich, who runs the place, and Walter Hamada, who runs DC, ultimately they said, you know what, this seems really cool, and let's just go for it. And we kept the budget really low in terms of, you know, Warner Brothers. It was still $55–60 million, but to them that's like an independent film. So.
And that for something in the DC universe, that's like...
It is very small for that, but still a huge amount of money, and we were just happy we went off and were able to make it. So, yeah, but it was not an easy sell to begin with, and to Joaquin either. You know, we talked about that last time. Joaquin wasn't looking to do comic book films. It's not the sort of normal thing that Joaquin would jump into, even though, you know, when I met with him and I explained it to him even before he read it, I'm like, it's not really a comic book movie, it's called Joker, but it's a different approach. Even after he read it and he liked it, he just, a little bit resistant about, it still was a DC movie, it was still called Joker, you know, so it was just not necessarily something that he had seen himself in his career doing one of those movies.
But it's, you know, when
No, but then you know, of course he did it. No, but it was not an easy. I guess what I'm saying is it was kind of difficult putting it together for a while in a lot of going on, you know, in society, and yeah, there's a lot of that. I mean, you know, in some ways the movie's also about the power of kindness, and I think if he was, you know, the best thing I hear about the movie is, as bonkers as the movie is, people will write me or say to me, you know, it makes me realize, you know, I see somebody on the street talking to themselves, and I suddenly, like, I feel for them. It's not like they necessarily go over and hug them, but they're looking at certain people in a different light. Or I got an email from a friend of mine whose sister has schizophrenia, and she said, you know, I'm going to treat her differently now. It's like not her fault, and she just needs to be, you know, and those kind of things. It's like, it's kind of beautiful. But I think that goes back to kind of Joaquin's portrayal of it. And a little bit of the trick of the movies, we were always doing an origin story about a villain. But even when I had pitched it to them at the first time at Warner's, it was like, well, what if you do an origin story about a villain where the villain is the hero and you love him and you root for him until you really can't root for him any longer. And it's a little bit the trick of the movie, is that you do love Arthur and you are rooting for Arthur, but really Arthur is a sort of sociopathic narcissist. And then at the end, you're like, okay, I just can't with this guy anymore. Like, you've really sort of torn how you feel about him. It's fucked up.
Definitely.